Konami loves high-level fairy monsters. Starting way back with Parshath, going through a stage of miscellaneous manga fairies, and ending now as Despia, they just love slapping those stars on fairy monsters. It makes sense. In Japanese, the fairy monsters are actually called angels, and they want them to feel like they've got some real presence, hence the high levels. One archetype in particular, Darklords, is almost nothing but high-level fairies. So today we're going to take a look at an archetype that combines all the best bits these high-level fairies have to offer, culminating in true angelic perfection, a level 12 fairy fusion monster. Oh, but Alice, how does the deck with almost nothing but high-level monsters not brick constantly? Okay, I have a confession to make. It's not the most consistent deck in the world. This deck should really be considered as Despia giving a buff to Darklords, and not the other way around. So while this isn't necessarily the best way to play Despia, I'm honestly not too sure since I haven't played the pure version very much. It probably is going to be pretty standard for Darklords going forth. The reason for their synergy lies mainly in two cards, the first of which is Dramaturge of Despia. Dramaturge is a level 8 dark fairy monster. Like most of the archetype, they're named after various theatre-related words, since Despia is a pun on death and thespian. Thespian meaning an actor, not to be confused with what I am. Dramaturge of Despia has two pretty powerful abilities. The first, which is a negate, isn't even the one you'd use it most for. Basically, if an extra deck monster is summoned, as in a real extra deck monster, not those things, you get to target a monster and negate its effects for the rest of the turn. Its other effect helps give some combo potential to the deck, since when you use it as a fusion material, it can summon itself right back. But what are you fusing it with, I hear you ask? Well, that's where the second card comes into play. Despia Theatre of the Branded lets you fusion summon a high-level fusion monster once per turn, so once you have this card out, you won't need to worry about finding ways to recycle polymerization or something like that. It even lets you recycle your fusion monsters if a non-fairy monster is destroyed, so hooray for sustainability. To make sure you find that field spell, you also run 3 Owlbear, Jester of Despia. When summoned, it allows you to search a branded spell or trap. Contrary to what certain printings of the card would have you believe. Not that it matters much for us anyway, since the field spell is both a branded and a Despia card. If you already have the field spell, you can also search Branded Opening, which special summons a Despia monster from the deck, but since it locks you into fusions, you try to avoid that in favour of making an Appaloosa. The Despia archetype does also have its own fusions, which are Queritus and Proskenion, but most of the time you'll be making the First Darklord instead. As the high-level fairy to end all high-level fairies, if summoned with the right materials, it allows you to completely wipe your opponent's board. What actually convinced me to test this deck out was the fact that, with Dramaturge, you can actually chain block that effect with Dramaturge's effect to special summon itself, making this deck fairly powerful at going second. And if, instead, you're going first, it lets you summon a fairy monster from your graveyard, which, combined with the other Darklord nonsense, lets you spam out a bunch of monsters and then turn them into something like a 4-material Appaloosa, or make some powerful rank 8 monsters. Anyway, decklist time. So to start off, you run the Despia package of 3 Dramaturge, 3 Owlbear, 3 Theatre of the Branded, and 1 Branded Opening and 1 Despian Tragedy. Tragedy is basically just in as a way to search Dramaturge, and you can trigger it off Foolish Burial or even Allure of Darkness, but other than that you'd actually need to fuse it away to get its search, and by then it's too late to use Dramaturge's effect, so 1 is enough. Then as for the Darklords, you run 1 Darklord Morningstar, 3 Ixchel, 3 Superbia, 3 Indulge Darklord, and 2 Darklord Ukobak as far as their monsters go. Ixchel helps you draw through your deck and get Darklords in the graveyard at the same time, which is great because you want to draw until you have Dramaturge in your hand and Superbia in the graveyard before committing to your fusion. Ixchel can also copy the effects of Darklord spells and traps in the graveyard, which we'll be going over soon, but basically it helps you fill the board even faster or provide additional disruption. Morningstar is basically only there to be fused into the First Darklord to provide it with a field wipe effect, and since the Darklords are pretty easily searchable, you only need 1. Superbia has a non-once per turn effect that, when it's special summoned from the graveyard, it also lets you special summon another fairy from the graveyard, which is one of the best ways this deck has to spam out monsters. It's also level 8, so together with Dramaturge, you can use it to make some good Xyz monsters. Be careful though, its effect can miss the timing, so it doesn't work when Ixchel copies the effect of a revival spell, and it also doesn't work if you chain the First Darklord's effect to special summon it back from the graveyard wrong. Also, Ixchel can only be special summoned once per turn, which can be a bit confusing during combos if you forget that restriction. Indulged Darklord and Darklord Ukobak are there to be a few more normal summons for the deck, with Indulged being an emergency way to search a Darklord, but giving your opponent a monster in the process, and Ukobak letting you send a Darklord card to the graveyard. That includes their spells and traps, so you can then copy those effects with Ixchel. The Darklord back row in question consists of 3 Banishment of the Darklord, 2 Darklord Contact, and 2 Sanctified Darklord. Banishment lets you search any Darklord card, and a hard once per turn on these cards don't actually apply when you copy their effects with Ixchel, so you'll usually be able to search twice with 1 Banishment. Darklord Contact is a monster reborn for Darklords, and is also copyable, and then Sanctified Darklord lets you negate a monster effect for the turn, gaining its attack in life points, as long as you have a Darklord on the field or graveyard to send as cost. Since you can just revive Ixchel during your opponent's turn thanks to the First Darklord, then she can copy this card's effects. It's a pretty easy way to get out more disruptions at a very little cost, especially since Ixchel only copies the effect of the card, not the cost. So when you're copying it from the graveyard, you don't actually need to send a Darklord monster to the graveyard. Finally, for their generic cards, you run 3 Allure of Darkness and 2 Trade-ins, since you run mostly dark monsters and quite a few level 8s. You then also run 1 Terraforming, 1 Foolish Burial and 1 Monster Reborn, followed by 2 Super Polymerizations. The Despian Fusions are great Super Poly targets, and they can help you break your opponent's board, but running 3 seemed a bit too much considering how much this deck draws. You can also just copy one with Vertianaconda anyway, so if you manage to make a Link 2 going second, you can then just send it, and your opponent will have to negate it if they don't want to lose a bunch of their monsters. Now for the extra deck. You run 3 of the First Darklord, since it's your main boss monster and ties the whole deck together. You then run 1 of each Despia Fusion, mostly as Super Poly targets, also as something else you can make in case you can't end on a powerful Link or Xyz monster. You should then run around 3 Super Poly targets. I run a Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, a Mud Dragon of the Swamp, and a Cordius, but if you have an idea of what you'll be playing against and can prepare more suitable Super Poly targets, feel free to swap these around a bit. Then for the rank 8s, I run a Hope Harbinger and a Dingirsu, which you'd usually make with Dramaturge and Superbia. Finally, you run a Predaplant Vertianaconda, which you can use to send Super Poly when going second in order to fuse away some of your opponent's monsters. And you also run a Condemned Darklord, which is more of a stepping stone in case your board is getting too full, but can also occasionally be useful to search a Darklord monster. You then run an Appaloosa, since you can fairly often make it with 4 negates when going first, and a Bowl Sword for an easy 80k going second. Bowl Sword is better than Access Code in this deck, because you don't actually tend to Link Climb, and instead just directly go into a Link 4, so the Access Code wouldn't be very powerful. As a sort of honourable mention, I am going to talk about Branded in Red. It's a branded card, so you can search it with Owlbear, and it's basically a quick play fusion card, which can be quite useful. There are definitely times where this can be better than Branded Opening, and I'm honestly not sure which of the 2 is best to run, so if you feel like making this deck a little bit more fusion focused, just replace Branded Opening by a Branded in Red, and that will let you access your Despia fusions more often. Now to show some replays of what you can actually do with this deck. If you've been enjoying the video so far, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more deck profiles like this in the future. This first replay is just going to show you one of the better boards you can actually make. You start by using Banishment of the Darklords to search a Darklord Superbia, which you then discard with Ixchel to draw 2 cards. You then use their field spell to summon the First Darklord, which will trigger Dramaturge's effect to summon itself, before you then use the First Darklord's effect to bring back a Superbia, which brings back the Ixchel. Ixchel copies a Banishment to search a Darklord contract, and then you normal summon Darklord Ukobak to send a Sanctified Darklord to the graveyard. You make those 4 into an Appaloosa, before using Contact to bring back a Superbia, which also brings back a Dramaturge. You can then make a rank 8 with them, and since you sent a Sanctified Darklord to your graveyard, you'll then be able to revive a Darklord monster with the First Darklord during your opponent's turn, which will then be able to copy that card's effect, giving you an extra negate. This second replay is to show you just how powerful their draw engine can be. In this hand you don't have Owlbear or the field spell, so you're just going to have to manually draw it, but thanks to all their effects that's not actually too hard. Starting with Ixchel, discard Superbia and draw 2 cards, then Allure of Darkness lets you banish an Indulged Darklord, which you then do again, this time drawing into the field spell. With it, you can summon the First Darklord. Since you've used his Dramaturge, it brings itself back, and then the First Darklord brings back Superbia to bring back an Ixchel, then normal summon Ukobak, which sends a banishment, which you then copy as Ixchel to search a Darklord contact. Then with the contact you just searched, you bring back another Superbia, which again brings back another monster. You can then turn those two level 8s into a rank 8 monster of your choice. This third replay shows an example of how to try and salvage less good hands. Starting with Ukobak, you normal summon it, which sends an Indulged Darklord to the graveyard. You then summon that back, and it lets you search a Darklord and summon one to your opponent's field. You search Ixchel, you can then use its effects to send a Superbia to draw 2 cards. You then have their field spell, but instead you can use a Super Poly, discarding a useless monster, and then fusing away the opponent's monster that you had to give them. Then the First Darklord summons Superbia, which summons an Ixchel, and that can summon another Superbia from the graveyard. With those two you can make a Hope Harbinger. You then set the Sanctified Darklord. Darklord Ixchel is on the field, so you can use that as a cost. Then you can use the First Darklord to revive the Ixchel, and then she can copy its effect in the graveyard to get another negate. Finally, with this hand, I wanted to show an example of the chain blocking field wipe that I was talking about, with the First Darklord and Dramaturge of Despia. Start by playing a banishment of the Darklords, which does get negated. Luckily I have what I need already. My opponent then allows me to use the field spell, probably because they don't really know too much about this deck yet. And so then I get my fusion summon off. Then 2 things trigger at once. The First Darklord triggers to wipe my opponent's field, and then Dramaturge of Despia triggers to special summon itself. My opponent chains a Borreload Savage Dragon, which they were probably saving for whatever fusion monster I summoned, but because of Dramaturge's effect being second in the chain, that's the one that they end up negating. In the end, it results in their whole board being wiped, and me only losing out from summoning 1 Dramaturge. So that's it for this deck profile. Ever since trying out Darklords and Duel Links, I've always wanted to try and make them work in the TCG. Now thanks to Despia, I think it's their best shot at working. What they lack in consistency, they make up for in raw power, and they're a very fun deck to pilot, having some really strong plays both when going first and second. Will you be giving the deck a try? Or is there something else from Burst of Destiny that you want to see a deck profile of? Tell me in the comments. And other than that, happy dueling!